So the most important goal of any startup is to achieve product market fit. So what does that mean? It means that you have the right product at the right time for a market that needs a solution to a real problem that you've identified. So there's a lot of inputs there, and it's extremely difficult to find this perfect balance. And the best way to do it is kind of through this iterative process, which we'll talk about in a second. So what does product market fit look like? A great example is Instagram. So a couple of years ago, the world was kind of shifting from web to mobile. And a lot of the legacy web products didn't really work very well on mobile platforms because on the web, the product is the actual website and they have features like photos and news feeds and those sorts of things. But on mobile, the product is actually the phone and the features are the individual apps. So Instagram recognized that, and they also recognized that maybe your Facebook social graph was a little bit out of date. So they found this problem that people had and they solved it perfectly for them through this mobile interface that allowed them to see photos quickly from their updated friend graph. And they kind of achieved product market fit perfectly and grew like crazy. So to understand how fragile and how rare it is to find product market fit that quickly, I will take a look at cupcake stores. So a couple of years ago, you had this boom where there were cupcake stores everywhere. And people were going to them and they'd kind of found this niche where there weren't many options for like craft, really delicious, kind of creative desserts that were relatively cheap and very easy to get, and of course delicious. But as they grew, there became too many of them. Now the market's completely oversaturated. They're not doing well. And it's probably time for a lot of these cupcake shops to maybe pivot and find another niche which will help them achieve that product market fit once again. So we've established that every great product solves an underlying viable problem. However, sometimes identifying these problems can be difficult. For that, I like to use a framework called the 5 Whys. This was originally done by Toyota. And basically what they did is they noticed that they had a part of the car that was broken. I think it was a gear. And so they looked at the assembly line and said, all right, well, this gear is broken. Here's the person who makes it. And they said, why is it broken? And they realized that, in fact, it was actually a problem a few steps before on the assembly line. They said, well, why is the part breaking there? And they basically just asked why until they got downstream enough to realize that there was actually this issue with the training programs early on, and they weren't training their new employees well enough. So they invested in this training program and they were able to fix all these problems upstream. So this is actually a really effective technique for startups as well. So you want to start thinking about your problem in very broad terms and then kind of narrow it down to get to the crux of the issue you'll be solving. So an example is a health food tracker that I've been making. And basically I like to track everything about myself. I track my steps with Fitbit, I track my sleep, all of that. And I'd like to track my diet, but I've never been able to. So I asked myself, why? I said, well, because the existing food trackers I use don't get the job done. Why is that? I'm never able to use them consistently. Why is that? It's too strenuous and annoying for me to constantly input data on the detailed minutia of my meals. So why is that? Because it's just not worth it to me to understand exactly how many calories I had down to the last piece of rice. I'm much more interested in bigger trends as to am I eating healthy or not. So I kind of worked my way to the end of this problem that I'm interested in a food tracker that tracks my health trends kind of from 30,000 feet as opposed to a very detailed calorie counter. And that's why the existing products don't work for me and solve my problem. Another good example is Zappos, a very public one. So Zappos probably looked at the industry 10 years ago or whatever it was for shoes and said, well, there's all these inherent benefits to selling things online. Why aren't shoes being sold online? And they realized, well, because people can't try them on and see how they fit and feel and look without the high costs of kind of sending them back and getting them and the time and the money. So why is that? Because there's no such thing as overnight shipping. There's no free shipping. Why is that? because online retailers didn't ever prioritize customer service. So basically, Zappos found their way to this really big problem that in-store retailers are very focused on people helping you through the buying process. But as soon as it went online, everyone forgot about that side of the business. Zappos was able to touch on that and create great customer service, free overnight shipping, free returns, all of that. And it really didn't have anything to do with them selling shoes. It had to do with them understanding that the problem was in the customer service. So what you want to do with the 5 whys is really expand your thinking around your problem, and it pushes you to really focus on what's really the problem here. What are you going to be solving if you decide to attack this problem in customer segment? So this framework will be really effective early on, and it'll also be effective a little bit down the road when you start interviewing customers about your potential problem and the market that it's in. And this process, as I mentioned, is very iterative. You constantly need to have your customers involved so that you understand their changing needs and you understand how to best deliver your solution to them. So this all starts day one with understanding your customer. And a great way to do that is through personas. So what you want to do is say, all right, if I'm solving this problem for someone, and who's the perfect person, who's my perfect customer? You want to understand that if this person doesn't use your product, no one's going to. So you want to write down where they live, where they work, how they spend their time, how they spend their money. You want to know what products they use, what interfaces they use, and really everything about them. So what I'll do is I'll name them. For our previous startup, we were to the point where product development, we would say, well, would Julie use this? And we'd say, well, Julie would have been here. And it sounds kind of ridiculous, but that we were talking about this fake person this way, but it's the best way to understand your customers early on. And it also helps with another thing. So you're going to want to find this iterative back and forth and close this kind of feedback loop with your customers. And for that, you need to find customers. And personas can be very helpful for that. So a great example is this health app that I built, and essentially I wanted to find perfect users for it. And it seems pretty daunting, find a bunch of customers, but if you break it down through personas, it really isn't. So I realized that my perfect customers I thought would be marathoners, triathletes, people who went to CrossFits. So I really just went there and planted myself there and said, after a class, I'd say, hey, I'm working on this product. It does this. Are you interested in being kept up to date as I go through the process? This is a nice way to kind of test your assumptions and your initial hypothesis too. So if people get really excited about it, which they actually will, it always feels like you're going to be bothering people, but that's not the case at all. People want these problems solved for them. So if someone's like, oh yeah, definitely keep me involved and I'll introduce you to so-and-so, they've got this problem and they know an app maker, and you'll see that this will start to happen when you've hit on something. You're starting to achieve that product market fit. If the other side of the coin kind of rears its ugly head and nobody's really interested and nobody wants you to keep them in touch, it's definitely time to maybe take a look at the problem you're trying to solve and make sure that it's real. It's a bit of a red flag if no one's interested in helping you. So once you start to amass these customers, you'll do what I think is probably my favorite little trick of the startup world, because nobody does it. It's so easy, it's so fundamental, and it gives you such a leg up, and it's what I like to call the mighty spreadsheet. Basically what this is just a list of customers from day one that you were involved with, that you're bouncing ideas off of, and eventually that you will give the product to when you launch. And you can set goals and say like, all right, I'm going to find 3 perfect customers today, and I'm going to find 10 this week, and I'm going to be at 25 or 50 or 100 by the end of the month. And the goal is you're going to kind of start with this group of people who are your friends and family, and maybe they're perfect customers, maybe they're kind of not. And they're not going to give you great feedback because they're not going to want to hurt your feelings, and everyone's going to say your idea is great. What you want to do is move away from that level and find people who have no emotional attachment to you, but have an emotional attachment to the problem you're solving. And start to get feedback from them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Keep them informed. Get introduced to their friends to understand, how this problem is being solved across a whole different vertical of people. And And once you have this kind of iterative back and forth, it'll be far easier for you to understand the problem and create a solution that makes sense for this customer group. Also, then when you finally do launch a product, you're going to have a big list of people to send it to at worst and a group of evangelists who will be immediately spreading the gospel at best. So kind of keeping this mighty spreadsheet and finding out who should be on it through personas and trying to achieve product market fit should be a really big goal for startups early on.